Good morning. Welcome back to Jane's Stories of Life. You know, one thing about memories, you have one memory, and before you know it, it has triggered several others. My last video was about Glad Rags, our company that we had, and I mentioned about how we used to travel to various places. And that made me think about all the road trips, the ways that we traveled when we were, the ways that I traveled growing up, the ways that our children traveled, the way that people travel now. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, as you know, and my mother's family was from Iowa. And so when we would travel to see them, we traveled by train. And other short things, like when I was in college, I traveled by Greyhound bus, or other short area trips. Sometimes we traveled by Greyhound bus. I was at least 23 when I was teaching in Detroit when I took my first flight. My first airplane trip was back and forth several times to Detroit. Sometimes I would drive, sometimes I would fly. The first time that I went on a cruise, I was 67 years old. And so, for most of those years, any trips that we took, we did by car. We did road trips. Our children were mid-teenagers by the first time they took their first flight. And I'm not sure how old John was when he took his first cruise. Unfortunately, Cindy never had an opportunity to cruise. Today when I travel, I'm amazed. I'm amazed on cruises to see the number of families with babies and strollers, all kinds of equipment on cruises. I look in the airports and I think, oh my goodness, I'm so glad we traveled by car when we could just throw everything in the car and go. I look at people juggling all that equipment that you need when you travel with children, when they're getting ready, when they're flying. But it's interesting, that today's youth have had so many opportunities to see the world beyond their neighborhood, their city, their state, and I think that's wonderful. Well, the years that our children were growing up, most of those years, we had a station wagon, which we loved. We would pack up and drive. Since we lived in upstate New York, we would have trips to Ohio to see my mom. We would have trips to the East Coast, to Delaware, to see Morgan's family, Delaware, New Jersey. Those were our normal travel routes. And then when we had Glad Rags Company, we were traveling as a family to various conventions and regional things. It was interesting, those of you who are involved with the Divine Nine, back then at Delta conventions and regionals, there were planned activities for husbands, spouses, and planned activities for children. So they were family vacations. When we had the fabric that we were selling in the various locations, the station wagon was filled with boxes and the carrier on top was filled with fabric. Other times when we were just doing family trips, the children used to love to ride in what they called the backpack, the cargo area of the station wagon. And back then, who thought about the safety? I mean, I look now, there were commercials at one point about car safety, and they showed dummies being thrown out the back of a station wagon where they had been, seated without seatbelts. And I thought, oh my Lord, that's how we traveled for years. The children loved sitting in the backpack. Once, after they were in college and so forth, out of the house, shortly there, maybe 5 or 6 years later, I switched to a minivan, and I absolutely loved having vans. I think in the course of, I don't know how many years, I probably had at least 3 minivans, maybe 4. Um, I after Morgan died, he had an SUV, and I had a minivan. My minivan was much older. It needed repairs and work. It was much older than his vehicle, so I ended up getting rid of the van. I miss that van. I don't buy lottery tickets, but you will hear me say, if I ever win the lottery, if I come into with some money, I am going to buy myself another minivan. I had several that were burgundy. This time I want a red minivan because I love minivans. Give me a minivan any day. Anyway, back to travel. Nowadays, I love cruising. I don't care to fly that much anymore. Airports are just a hassle as far as I'm concerned. We've used the train. We did the auto train, which is the train that goes between near DC and outside of Orlando. We used that 3 or 4 times. When you for those unfamiliar, you drive to the train, you get on the train, your car goes on a carrier car. When you reach your destination, they drive your car off of the carrier, you get in your car and you go. And that's a wonderful way to travel, so that you have your own vehicle. Yes, it was, I think, 17 hours. But, periodically that was a good way to travel between near DC and the Orlando area. But road trips, when we traveled by car, we always had snacks. We always had a thing of Tang that, we could mix with water, and we always had Oreos, and we always had sandwiches, and we always had chips and things like that. Because back then, and I'm talking about the 70s and the 80s, hotels did not offer breakfast options the way they do now. So if you stayed overnight someplace, then you had to find a place to go to breakfast the next day. Or if you were hungry on the road and you were thirsty, you had to stop and get something to eat or drink. So we always carried a lot of, odds and ends with us. And of course, that was before the days of electronics. We had the road maps. There were no GPSs. There were no cell phones. The children had books and coloring books and portable games and things like that. But, I don't know how much families travel that way anymore. But road trips were a way of life for many of us for many years. And you miss when you travel, when you fly, you really miss seeing the countryside. And it was just a good time. Now I don't care to be in a car more than driving myself, about 2 hours is my limit. Back then, Morgan did all the driving. That was kind of the thing. The husbands drove, the wives rode, the children rode, and that was it. And once in a while, if he got tired, and it was usually driving up the boring New York State Thruway in the rain, when he would suddenly say, "I think I'm tired. You want to hear you take over for the rest of the ride?" But road trips were fun. You played games, you looked at signs, you counted punch bunnies, buggies or something, with counting Volkswagen bugs, Volkswagens and things like that. So many memories of those road trips. So I don't know what your experience was. Some of you older people will relate to what I'm saying. Some of your younger people say, "Ooh, ride in a car. Oh no, we always flew." But anyway, that's my memory that was triggered by the last video, road trips. Cherish your memories and pass them on.